Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're going to objectively map out a worldview that is deeply complex, highly subjective, and honestly, absolutely fascinating. We're diving into a text titled The Playback Experiment, Faith Against Persecution. Now, reading this document is kind of like reading a psychological survival guide written from a place of intense, almost esoteric observation. It lays out this wild framework where earthly authorities aren't viewed as protectors at all. Instead, they're seen as the orchestrators of an elaborate, life-threatening game. We're going to break down exactly how the author perceives this system, the wild mechanics they claim are used against everyday people, and finally, the radical solution they propose to escape the whole thing.
The author kicks off this intense document right out of the gate with a massive claim. They assert that authorities don't just investigate crimes, they perform a pre-written narrative. They literally declare, once upon a time, police played a script. That right there is the foundational premise of this entire text. In this worldview, the whole idea of police simply finding culprits, total illusion. Instead, the system is viewed as a theatrical stage where the outcomes are already predetermined and the individuals caught up in it are just unwilling participants in this heavily orchestrated production.
All right, here's how we're going to break this down today. First, we'll look at the game of authority. Second, we dive into the playback experiment itself. Third, we explore the trap of responding. And finally, we'll cover faith against persecution.
So, let's jump right into part 1, the game of authority.
According to the text, understanding this worldview begins with recognizing 3 absolute rules of the game. 1. Police can't be trusted at all. 2. They play a double game. And 3. If you blame, they frame. The author is super clear here. In this specific game, allowing yourself to be rescued is actually a fatal trap. They literally say, rescuing is death. The idea is that the system is perfectly designed so that bringing an allegation or trying to hold authorities accountable only invites a massive wave of persecution right back onto yourself.
To explain exactly how this double game functions, the author posits that these authorities operate as what they call split personality criminals. Now, to be clear, this isn't meant to be a medical diagnosis. It's a description of a really dark manipulative tactic. The authorities constantly shift their roles, moving from persecutor to rescuer and then right back to persecutor. This constant dizzying shift is designed to completely confuse, disorient, and eventually trap their targets. It makes it literally impossible to know where you stand or who is actually trying to help you.
To vividly illustrate the perceived stakes of this game, the author shares a pretty chilling personal anecdote about the cost of confronting the system. They note that just suffering under the system in general cost them 1 year of their life. But when they directly challenged the authorities, specifically saying, "I said to the police, you are corrupt," the retribution was swift. The author claims this direct accusation resulted in exactly 3 years being taken from their life. It's a very stark, concrete metric for how the author quantifies the cost of participating in this game.
Which brings us to Section 2, the playback experiment.
This is where things get really wild. The crucial point here is that this framework maps out a deliberate, calculated psychological trap. The author observes that authorities, like police and even psychiatrists, act almost like twisted scientists running a study. Step 1, project images of dead bodies or use actors to simulate trauma, basically fabricating victims and evidence out of thin air. Step 2 is to simply sit back and observe how the target responds to this fabricated reality. And step 3 is where the authorities manipulate the situation to prove their case to a judge and earn rewards. The author even notes that whoever founded this game has a lot of money, framing the whole system as a well-funded, corrupt psychological study.
But it's not just about physical traps. The text throws out this massive warning that the manipulation is highly linguistic. They urge readers to beware of minds programming you by language. They claim that enmity and everyday slang are used as a deliberate catalyst against individuals. This language acts as an invisible force utilized by what the author calls sinful robbers to destroy a target's seeds and body from the inside out, slowly taking over their property and well-being.
And this right here perfectly illustrates the esoteric paranoia running through the text. It dives into deeply specific mechanisms of control, describing a literal audio loop trap. The author claims that the system plays an audio loop containing the vocal prints of a computer voice, but encoded with recorded human emotions. Why on earth would they do that? Well, supposedly, it's to directly affect the victim's fight response. It's described as a neural response designed to counteract life-threatening situations, pulling the spirit in to help during times of intense persecution.
The author wraps up this whole experimental phase by calling the authorities' narrative exactly what they think it is, a complete, confident fabrication. They call it the film of lies projected by authority. They point out that an endless number of so-called small cases act as a kind of slow poisoning, systematically taking away a person's lifespan and health. By fabricating victims and agendas, the authorities secure the judgment they need to administer this invisible poison.
All right, moving on to Section 3, the trap of responding. The explainer gives us two very clear, contrasting paths here. On the left side, we have taking action, and the author is absolutely unequivocal about this. Participating in interrogation in any form is death. Engaging with the system, even if you're just trying to defend yourself, is a fatal trap. On the right, we have the author's ultimate solution: no action. The text insists that taking absolutely zero action is fundamentally better than taking any action prompted by persecutors. It's this radical philosophy of complete, absolute non-engagement.
Now, there's a central paradox in the text that you have to understand. The author says, you cannot not judge. It sounds like a riddle, right? But what they mean in the context of this experiment is that whenever someone suspects a mistaken response and you react, even slightly, someone is judging you. Someone is measuring whether those judgments affect your image or your reputation. It's a constant, inescapable, invisible surveillance of your reactions. Basically, the text argues that fighting back is exactly what the system wants you to do. If you counteract their responses, you merely mirror the event that forced you to respond in the first place, which attracts the exact same persecution right back onto you. It's a vicious loop. The author asserts that this cycle of crime and persecution is where lower-order consciousness dwells. Engaging in the fight doesn't save you, it just pulls you down into their corrupted level.
Then we hit this massive, dramatic turning point in the text. The author formally and almost legally declares an end to their participation in this worldly, psychological game. They state, "Contract works fine. My contract with invisible observers is over. Thanks to all participants for participating in the Playback Experiment." Boom. It is a bold declaration of absolute independence from the cycle of stimulus and response that authorities completely rely on.
And that leads us perfectly into our final section, faith against persecution.
Here, the narrative takes a hard pivot from earthly paranoia straight into deep spiritual resilience. The author suggests that no matter how powerful the minds in authority are, no matter how clever their audio loops or psychological scripts might be, divine consciousness vastly outranks them. They assert that our Father's thoughts are higher. Because human imperfection equates to sin and death, the only logical step left is to appeal directly to a higher, perfect power.
And they anchor this entire defense mechanism in the recitation of the Lord's Prayer. They present the full text of the prayer not just as a religious tradition, but as a literal, tactical shield. In a world where language is weaponized to program and poison you, this specific prayer is positioned as the ultimate counter-frequency. The text claims, plain and simple, that the emotions of faith and prayer are the absolute best defense in a state of persecution.
As we wrap up the core concepts of this breakdown, the text makes it clear this kind of spiritual tuning isn't just to make you feel better in a tough time. It is literal survival. The text states that tuning to thoughts of the Father in heavens is resurrection. Love wins and attracts salvation, while love mixed with ignorance is simply sin and death. By elevating their consciousness entirely out of that lower-order game of the police and into the divine, the author achieves a kind of true resurrection away from the experiment.
So it leaves us to ponder this fascinating, intense psychological and spiritual framework. When you're faced with a system that feels like an inescapable, highly orchestrated script, where literally every reaction is measured and used against you, is radical withdrawal and unyielding spiritual faith the ultimate victory? It's a really powerful question about the nature of authority, resistance, and where we actually place our ultimate trust. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep seeking to understand the systems around you.